All right, so I think everybody has joined successfully, so we'll get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's walkthrough and refresher of the liquidity dashboard. Today we have Carlos Cordova is going to be doing the walkthrough, and then we will have chance for questions at the end. So if you do have any questions while Carlos is going through the liquidity dashboard, please use the chat feature to submit any of those. And then once Carlos is done, then feel free to unmute your lines to ask questions as well. Also, today's webinar will be recorded so that we can send it out to you guys afterwards. So I'll turn it over to Brendan and Carlos.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So today we're going to be going over our liquidity solutions. We have a liquidity dashboard as well as a liquidity at a glance tool. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
And while Carlos is sharing his screen, just to give everybody a little bit of background about this tool, I think we built it like a year and a half ago. We heard from the State Supervisory Processing Committee that there was just a desire for more reporting around liquidity and liquidity analysis. So we stood up like a small working group under the data working group. And we kind of put this together. And so now with like a recession approaching, we kind of just wanted to give everybody a refresher of how it works and how to use it. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end, and we can talk about anything related to liquidity that's on your mind. So Carlos, take it away.
All right, thanks. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
All right, perfect. So to access the CSBS analytics solution, you will need access in your single sign-on account will need access. We did receive some emails this morning, and we did grant access to those who requested it. For added security, this is a multi-factor authentication method. But once you're able to get into CSBS analytics and log into the bank data homepage, this is the screen you'll see. This is the homepage of our bank data solution. And the liquidity tools we'll be talking about is our liquidity dashboard here at the bottom, liquidity dashboard 2.0. So I'm going to run through these tools again, just talk about how we use them, where we're pulling data. But additionally, this information is available in the email that was sent out. We have a user guide for the liquidity tools, and we also have YouTube videos available for both the liquidity dashboard and liquidity at a glance.
And Carlos, just for anybody not familiar with our analytics platform, will you just pull up a new tab and just show them data.csbs.org? And there's like a orientation video at the top. So if you go to this page, there's that videos drop down at the top. And so if you're brand new to the platform and you don't know how to get around, there's like, you can click on that introduction video and it'll sort of show you the areas where to log in and how to get to the specific screens that Carlos is working on. And I think those are also in our user guides that we've developed.
Yep, and to log into the tool, it's the link on the top right corner, log into CSBS BI. So let me go back to our first tab. And then once you're in our bank data project, you want to go to the liquidity dashboard button, which is here in the middle at the bottom.
Carlos, do you want people to follow along in this?
So you don't have to follow along. As I mentioned, this information is all available in the user guide in the video, so you don't have to go click for click with me. You can just sort of focus on what I'm showing you, just because I'm going to be showing some key features of how to interact with the dashboard.
And I'd say it looks like there's 150 people on the call right now. So if like everybody on the call tries to access this solution, it'll probably like hang up and maybe not be responsive. We're just not used to having this many users on the system at one time. So if you can't do it, like you can just watch Carlos's screen. And again, we already sent and we'll resend PDF user guides and videos and kind of whatever support resources you need. So feel free to just watch Carlos's screen and follow along.
Yep. So let's start here with the liquidity dashboard. So let's sort of talk about what we're seeing here on the screen. So we do have basically a big grid here. And what we have is we have bank names going up and down on the rows here on the left-hand side. And then across the top, we have 10 different liquidity ratios. These are all being sourced from the UBPR. We also have tabs up top. So by default, we are showing the current value for a particular ratio for a bank. But we have additional tabs. So if you're interested in seeing the change of these ratios, we have tabs for that. So we have yearly growth, quarterly growth, and 3-year growth. This just really allows you to see how these ratios are changing over time. Other functionality that we have available is that any of these ratios can be sorted. So if you hover over the header, here I'm hovering over non-core to total assets, yearly growth. There's a little drop-down arrow, and I can sort ascending or descending, and there's also an advanced sort as well. So if you just want to see non-core to total assets ascending, you're able to do that to filter your grid in that way. We do have additional filters up here in the filters button towards the top left. So let me open this up. And here we have filters. The first tab here is by location, so you can filter down to a specific state, a specific city. And additionally, if you have a specific bank you're looking for, you can type in the individual bank name or the bank cert numbers. You can enter multiple cert numbers at once if you'd like. Say if you're divided up into regions, you can throw in all the cert numbers for a particular region to view your dashboard in that way. The next tab we have is our time filter. Right now I'm displaying data for 2019 Q2, but you see that we are starting to get some of this Q1 data from the call report, so that is available now. Every week we load additional data as more and more banks are filing. The next tab we have is some banking filters. So you're able to filter by the FDIC definition of a community bank, by state chartered banks, and additionally by regulator and by class. The last tab that we have here is our ratio legend. Again, just to be transparent with how we are calculating all of these ratios, we break it down into the individual components and also include the UBPR codes that we are using. So one example I'll point out here is if you're looking at non-core to total assets before. So here we're using UBPR D662 minus K434. All of that is divided by 2170. So again, you're able to see the specific UBPR elements that we're using to calculate these ratios.
Carlos, do you want to just quickly pull up that list of the elements that go into the liquidity ratio calculation, since that's, I don't know, one of the most important things here?
Yes, so for our liquidity ratio, we are calculating here liquid assets over current liabilities. And we list out our liquid assets here in the highlighted portion. So we're using interest-bearing balances, non-interest-bearing balances, Fed funds sold, total investment security, and we are subtracting holding gains and pledged securities. So that is the numerator, which we are using here for our liquidity ratio. And then the denominator being current liabilities, which we are defining here as deposits, Fed funds purchase and resale, FHLB advances, and other borrowings. So that is how we are defining our liquidity ratio in the platform.
So I just wanted Carlos to point that out, because I think there's to the best of my knowledge, I think there's 4 different liquidity ratios that we sort of were talking through as we built this tool. And some of them have different things. There's one that includes held to maturity securities. And so we just want to be clear about how our liquidity ratio is being calculated. And you can access that in the ratio legend.
Yep. So that's our ratio legend here. And then we do have an advanced filters functionality. Let me go ahead and click into there. So this is separated by tab. So you'll see the first section here is just related to the metrics themselves. The next section, section 2 here, is related to the yearly growth metrics, and then so on, quarterly metrics, and then below we have the 3-year growth metrics. And for these advanced filters, you select an object on the left-hand side and then move it over to the right-hand side. So I'm just going to do a demo here. I'm going to select net non-core funding dependency. I'll move it over, and I'll specify that I want to see net non-core with the value greater than 0.2. But you can add multiple metrics to this filter. So I'm also going to add our liquidity ratio, but I'll change the operator to be less than. Oh no, that was the other one. So that was greater than. I'll change the liquidity ratio to be less than, and then I'll enter a value of negative 0.2. And then the other feature that we do have here is that you can change the Boolean operator between the two conditions. So right now it is an AND function, but if we click on that, we can select OR, and not, or not. So that is some of the functions here in the advanced filters. And once you have all your conditions set here on this page, there is a button on the bottom left to run your document again.
And so while Carlos is running that, when we were building this tool, we got some feedback from the states that they like to do their surveillance from a liquidity perspective on not just the liquidity ratio, but maybe some other metrics as well, net non-core funding dependency ratio. And so that advanced filter button, it allows you to put in those conditions. So that the liquidity yearly growth net of negative 0.2, that's a 20% drop in your liquidity ratio over the year, or a 20% increase in your net non-core funding dependence ratio. So if your non-core funding has gone up or your liquidity has gone down, either of those things would put the bank on the list. So it just gives you a little bit of flexibility there, especially being able to use the AND or the OR operator.
Yep, exactly. And then once you have all your filters set, your regular filters as well as your advanced filters, you can save a version of this dashboard to your personal folder. Each individual user account has their own user folder, which can be accessed on our home screen or even on this screen with the folder icon. It'll take you to My Report, which again is a user-specific folder. So again, I can filter this dashboard to a subset of banks that I want to look into their liquidity. Then I can save this by going to the hamburger here on the top right and selecting the save option. And this will allow you to save it to your folder. Another option that's available once you have all your filters set, is that you can export this grid as well. So here above the column headers, there's a drop down towards the top right. And here you have the option to export this grid to both PDF or to Excel. So again, that functionality is available to you. So with this dashboard, again, we're comparing a group of banks and analyzing different liquidity ratios, but we also have the ability to drill in to a specific bank just for further analysis. And to do that, you click on the name of a bank here on the rows. So I'm going to select a bank here to drill into that will take us to our next dashboard, which is called Liquidity at a Glance. All right, so I selected a bank here for analysis and liquidity at a glance, and let's go over, I guess, just sort of some of the functionality that we have. At the top, we have a slide selector. So you can select the range of quarters that you want to see for your analysis. And then below, we have our graphs split up into different tabs. The first two being the overview ratios that we were seeing on the liquidity dashboard. But then we also include...
Carlos, which one has liquidity ratio on it? Is that overview 2?
That is probably overview 2. Yes.
There it is.
Resize my screen. Yes, so liquidity ratio is here on overview 2. And what we are doing is we are comparing the bank's value, which is the bar, to the state median, which is the line. So that's what we're showing here on the individual graphs. But instead of just showing the ratios, we do take it a step further. So if we go over to the assets tab, you actually see that this graph is in dollar value. So again, you can see what components are making up the numerator of a ratio as well as the denominator of a ratio. So you can see what is driving the change. You know, maybe the numerator is growing, the denominator is shrinking. So you can see all those. And then we have a deposits tab and then liabilities tab. And then at the end, we do also include our legend. Again, just so that you can see how we are calculating these metrics. And again, you're able to see the UBPR code that we're using.
And Carlos, will you just go to the unencumbered liquid assets tab? So, you know, the idea and what Carlos is showing is you look at all the banks against one another, you filter the list to your state, you can apply some metrics, whether it's on level of metrics, so any bank with a liquidity ratio less than 10%, or any bank with a liquidity ratio who's dropped 10%, or whatever you want to do, you can customize your list. And then you use this liquidity at a glance tool to dig into an individual bank. And this, maybe you can pick a better example, Carlos. But this unencumbered liquid assets tab, those are all the things that are in the numerator of the liquidity ratio. So a lot of times if there's a company that's having a liquidity situation, you can sort of visually see which pieces of the numerator and denominator are driving that change in their liquidity position.
And I did pull up another bank here. Let's see if we can see that.
So let's see. Their drop was probably driven by that drop in interest-bearing balances in 2019 Q4. When you're looking at banks who are actually having like, sometimes there's just like outliers or weird situations or mergers and acquisitions, but it can really like tell you a lot if you look through these data points.
Yep. And then one other feature that we wanted to highlight here on this call is that all of these graphs, you'll notice that there is a little drop down here on the top right of each graph. So again, these individual graphs can also be exported to PDF and to Excel, you know, in case you want to throw them into a report or a presentation. That option's available. And then another option that we have available is this quarter filter on the top right. So if you only want to see year-end data, you know, you can uncheck Q1, Q2, and Q3, and that will just bring back only the Q4 data for all of these metrics that we're showing.
And so Carlos, remind me, so if this bank we're looking at, First United Bank in Minnesota, if they have filed their Q1 2020 call report, we refresh that once a week during filing season. Will it show up here as soon as they file that?
Yes, that will show up in this dashboard. Yep, because again, this is all being sourced from call report data, so that will be available in this dashboard as well as our liquidity dashboard. So I can select the quarter 2020 Q1, and then we'll see all the banks we have information for that quarter.
So I think there's like 500 or 600 banks as of a couple days ago that had filed their Q1 call reports already. And so they have, because of COVID-19, there's a 30-day extension on when Q1 call reports are due. So generally they would be due April 30th, which is in like a week. But because of this filing extension, there could be a delay when some banks are filing. So just know that you can come here to check whether banks have filed their call reports or not. We're not sure, to what extent banks are going to take advantage of that extension. But I think one of the things we were talking about earlier today is maybe in our COVID all states communication, we'll post like some stats about how many banks have filed so far for Q1, so that everybody can kind of understand what that looks like through the extension.
Yep, and that brings us to the end of the demo portion here. Were there any initial questions with any of these dashboards that we showed today? And again, this information is also included in the user guide as well as the YouTube videos that were included in the mailing for this event.
So Carlos, this is our liquidity dashboard. And again, the purpose of this webinar was just to give everybody a refresher on this and that it is available as a resource. But we'd also just like to hear from you in general, like, what are you thinking about when it comes to liquidity? What type of issues do you foresee on the horizon? I think there's a good collection of people on this call. So if you have questions that go outside of the specific functionality of this tool, we would love to hear from you. So feel free to ask anything liquidity related.
Yeah, and Brennan's also, everybody should feel free to use the chat room in case they just want to type in a question instead of unmuting their phone. That's fine as well. We have a couple people monitoring the chat room, so feel free to use that.
Brennan, so it looks like we have a question in the chat. I think it was just sent to me, so I'll read it out loud. So it says, I know you can filter each quarter for just specific banks in an area. Is there a way to have an ongoing setting to pull banks in a portfolio to access information each quarter without having to apply the filters each time?
Yes. So if you have a group of banks that you're always interested in their information, right, so you can enter their bank certs into this field here. Again, you can enter multiple certs at a time. It doesn't have to be just one. And then once you have that in, you can save that version of your dashboard. Again, that's by going to the hamburger on the top right and selecting Save. And then when you come into the dashboard, the next day, from your home screen, there is a My Reports folder up here. And then in your My Reports folder, you'll just run that dashboard you saved. So again, that allows you just to not sort of have to redo the filters every time you come in and run the liquidity dashboard.
So it looks like we have a comment here that some of these liquidity ratios will be distorted due to the PPP loans related and related fund borrowing due to these loans. That's a good point.
Okay, so question came in about municipal bonds. I've seen some significant declines in municipal bond portfolios lately. Can these be monitored separately? At what level of decline should they be removed from the liquidity numerator? So that's a good question. I'm curious to hear if any of the people on this call have thoughts about this, kind of the concept of other than temporary impairment, Anyone thought about this or thinking about municipal bonds and their impact on liquidity?
I guess, Brennan, one question for the group would be if others have also seen those declines in municipal bonds, bond portfolios, and what they're doing with it, just to make sure that this isn't just a one-off. So, to the 162 people on the call, I would love to hear if someone else has seen or other states have seen declines in municipal bond portfolios and how they're addressing it. And if you want to jump in the conversation, you can just unmute your microphone and jump in. Okay, we have Patrick Lamb, that's from Indiana, saying nothing that I'm aware of in Indiana right now. I know we have a lot of other states represented on the call, so please jump in and tell us if you're seeing anything or not.
So, Sebastian, this is Jim Cooper. I guess it might be early on some of these questions in terms of downgrades, and also corporate bond defaults may play in here. Brennan and I were talking about the way this is presented earlier today, and it includes both available for sale and held to maturity securities. So, I think that that presents issues also if you start moving securities out of held to maturity and sell them, then that has the potential to reclassify the entire portfolio. So you have to potentially take a mark on things that you were not expecting to. So, I think what this does, at least from my perspective, I think as the March data comes in here, it should give you some perspective on banks that have liquidity, are light on liquidity going into this downturn, and maybe help identify institutions that you want to talk to. I think this question about the PPP loans is a good one. So banks may have lots of demand there. How are they managing that from a liquidity standpoint? There's obviously going to be other loan demand, and how what sort of limits they're putting on those types of relationships. I think are all relevant questions, but without a doubt, banks that are going in with low liquidity are going to be, you're going to want to keep an eye on them, I think. So when this was developed last year, Brennan talked about this earlier, it was because regulators on the State Supervisory Processes Committee and others were starting to identify liquidity risk, funding risk, and that's really why this dashboard was developed. I don't think any of us had the foresight to know that, to expect what we see here. So hopefully this gives you some help. I think the other thing that is, as people dive into this and you make observations, if you want to share those back through data at csbs.org, if you have questions or comments or observations about the way the dashboard works, that'd be helpful, because as you see at the top, this is version 2.0, and I think we're always trying to iterate and improve things. So I think Dan Berkman pointed out on the PPP loans and the liquidity facility, that's really going to show up in the second quarter.
So second quarter call report, but so is there an extension for that as well? Brennan, you mentioned earlier there's been an extension for Q1. Is there an expectation that Q2 will be extended as well for reporting purposes?
I don't think there's been any official guidance on the Q2 filing deadline. I think right now it's just focused on Q1, but I don't know. I feel like if once we get to that point where we're approaching the end of Q2, if we're still in this, there could potentially be another extension. So,
which, I mean, Q2 would be, I guess, the deadline for reporting would be July 31st, right?
Right.
But if there's an extension, that takes us past the summer into the fall. So what are states doing to sort of keeping an eye on that with their institutions, and not just sort of waiting on Q2 data? Are there any states out there that are accounting for that in their offsite surveillance systems?
In Connecticut, we started doing some reach outs to banks. And I'm not really that worried about the Paycheck Protection Program because of the liquidity facility with the Federal Reserve. But one thing that does seem to be an issue is the forbearance loans. The first couple of banks we contacted, it seemed like the balances were pretty low, and it was good to see that. But then in some of the subsequent banks, the level of forbearance loans was much higher, and that seems like that's going to be a strain on liquidity that wouldn't show up necessarily in this type of ratio analysis, but somehow needs to be quantified. So we're kind of keeping an eye on the banks that have higher levels of forbearance agreements.
And then you're just touching base with those institutions on a sort of one-on-one basis?
We'll probably put them in some sort of enhanced liquidity monitoring situation.
Okay. Are there other states out there that have a similar approach, or they have a different approach?
I mean, I guess, we're still only at Q1 filing season and only 500 submitted. So, this could all just be like a little bit early. We wanted to make sure everyone knew that it was there. But, as you get deeper into your analysis, I think one option that's available is we could add some municipal bond metrics into this tool. So if it would be helpful at a bank level to see a ratio like municipal securities as a percentage of total securities, so that you could see how much of a bank's security portfolio is related to municipal bonds, that's definitely something we could add.
Okay, there's been a couple of comments here in the chat. So William from Arkansas saying Arkansas has a self-exam program. Then Adam, I'm not sure which state Adam's from. We've seen some hesitation in redeployment maturing investments to boost short-term liquidity. Can't help but think this will come back around for liquidity in long term as earnings may be reduced. And then Jordan says, can we share the customized reports once we have the filters set? Which is more of a technical question there. Yep. For Carlos, maybe?
Yeah, so in terms of sharing, we can do that on our end. So for example, if you create a report that you want to share with 4 other users, please reach out to us, data@csbs.org. We also have a link here and just in the banner of our dashboard that says contact us. That'll just trigger an email to direct it at us. But we would do that on your behalf. So you say, I created report X that's in my folder. Can you please share it with these other 3 users? And then on our end, we will take that report and place it into the My Reports folder of those other 3 users.
Okay, and have you seen much activity on that front, Carlos and Brandon? I mean, have you gotten emails or requests from states that want to share their custom reports?
Yes, I have seen that on my end. Some with these pre-existing dashboards like we have, like our liquidity dashboards that we're showing, but also within our self-service analytics section of our platform, where users can sort of create their own analysis. So we've seen it more with the self-service, where a user will create a dashboard on their own and then would want to share that specific dashboard with other users in their organization.
Okay. So there was another comment here from Oscar, state of Illinois, contacting all the banks every week or 2 to check on, as well as, to check on COVID-19 effects on the loan portfolio and staff to serve customers.
Good to hear that.
Yeah. Are there any other states that would like to chime in on that? Again, that could be done through the chat room or by just unmuting your microphone.
I think Florida is getting ready to send out or call all the banks and ask a number of questions to try and get an understanding of where these banks stand regarding the pandemic. But the field examiners haven't done that to this point to contact all these banks.
Okay, thank you. Daryl, yep, go ahead.
Okay, actually in New Jersey, we've already done mailings, one to ask all about liquidity and branches, etc. And then recently we went for one for loans, for the SBA PBP loans. So yeah, we're monitoring the liquidity, and we get daily or weekly updates from the banks.
Okay. Daryl from Utah commented, we've contacted most of our banks and industrial banks to get their take on the PPP and if they have any other issues, especially liquidity. And then Patrick Land from Indiana, initial conversation with all banks, now informal as needed for most banks, scheduled check-ins with larger banks weekly or bi-weekly. All right, very good.
I guess, Daryl, have you heard in that outreach where you're asking about other issues like liquidity, like are you hearing a lot of concern from your banks about the liquidity topic specifically? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's fine. We have asked them several questions just, about the crisis and how their, deposits are acting. Are they getting large withdrawals? Are they getting a lot of drawdowns on their loans? So every institution's unique in that regard, but no one at this point in time has any real liquidity concerns. Most of our institutions, especially the industrial banks, have been severely beaten up over the years about their liquidity and on-balance liquidity and broker deposits. So as a result, they have a pretty good contingency plan built in and, secured lines of credit, either with their parent company or with the Fed or with the FLUB. So for the most part, right now, everything looks pretty good. But of course, with the deferments and cash flows issues with other borrowers, we'll have to see how it plays out.
Yep. Thanks for that, Daryl.
So Daryl, you raised the question about deposit withdrawals. Are any other states seeing unusual demands for cash, big withdrawals? Because I know we had some reports of that maybe a couple of weeks ago, but
Early on, yep.
seems like we've not heard too much about it recently. So silence is good here in that
Yes,
case.
it would be, yep.
See, Georgia, large banks, we are having at least weekly discussions on liquidity. It appears there are not significant concerns with the ability to fund the PPP loans. Withdrawals were a concern earlier during the outbreak, but not anymore. Yeah, I think that's what we heard. Like in the beginning, there was some
a bit of a panic early on to get some big withdrawals early on, and then it's sort of settled down a little bit.
And then let's see, liquidity levels seem to be stable on banks that I have talked to in the last couple of weeks. Banks increase their cash available for their customers. Okay, good to know. So again, it's probably early in all this to kind of talk about it, but maybe we can circle back down the road.
Okay, and this may be a topic for a later day, but at some point, I would really like to hear about how states, just hear kind of stories or examples of how states are using this platform to really upgrade their offsite work, their surveillance work, and then also their examiner training processes. I would think that there's a lot of information out there that states could use to train their examiners more quickly on how to analyze liquidity, especially at the institution level. So that's a conversation we can have some other time, but that's something that I'd like to hear about at some point. All right. Any other comments, or Brennan or Carlos? Any parting shots before we wrap up?
I think so I see one more, Oscar. We are using these reports during pre-planning quite a lot. Good to hear.
Right.
I think the one last thing I want to mention is just that, we had a advanced analytics training program before all the travel restrictions went into place, and that went well. But one thing we heard is kind of a need for a more basic beginner training. So the analytics team and the Education Foundation, Seb and Katie, we are in the process now of developing like a day one analytics program, which will be like super foundational, not I think it'll be like a couple hours max. It'll be delivered in an online format. So if any of the stuff you saw today seems like intense or overwhelming, or you don't even know where to start, we're preparing resources that are kind of foundational 101 things. So keep your eye out for announcements about that from Katie and Seb.
Actually, Brennan, it's Liz. I have another question. We have 50 states. How many states have more than one or two, I guess, participants? Meaning, like, I know I'm the one on ours, and I tried to get the whole team. But I know the last time we had one of these, we tried to get, all the examiners. What would you say are the statistics?
So I think there's like different levels of engagement from different states. I think there are some states where they have kind of one person serves as the analytics POC or subject matter expert, and they pull our reports and dashboards and share them with their examiners sort of on an as needed basis. And then we have other states who are a little bit further along their sort of analytics exploration. So like Tracy Bergman in Iowa has set up like a internal data analytics task force in Iowa that we talked about at the deputies conference, where, they're really kind of all in with it, and there's a lot of people participating in that. So kind of a hard question. It definitely varies by state, but to the extent that, CSBS can kind of help and facilitate that sort of awareness piece and help other people use the platform. And I think this day one analytics program will be a great tool to get people who aren't plugged in but need to be plugged in the loop on all this stuff. So that wasn't really a specific answer, but that's what I got.
So Brendan, how many users do you have on the platform now?
I think we have close to 900 users on the platform. So that's a lot of people. There are states that have enrolled their entire bank examination teams, and their bank examination teams actively use our tools. I would say, the power users of the platform, when you look at like daily active users, it's not 900. It's under 50 people that use the platform simultaneously. So,
All right, so if that's all we have for today, thank you guys so much again for calling in today. I will be sending out an email that has the recording and some other resources for you guys, and also a feedback survey. We'd love to get your thoughts on today's webinar. So again, thank you so much for joining, and have a great day.
And one last thing, if you want to talk to the data team or you have follow-up thoughts or questions, data@csbs.org, go to the team. So if there's anything that we didn't cover or that you want to ask outside the call, get in touch. Okay, now we can go.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all. Bye.